Ricardo Cortez. Thank you for coming to my ATC presentation this morning. I also go by the name Tijuana Rick, the friendly Chicano. I want to start my presentation off with some thank yous. Thank you to Craig's, James, and Shannon. The three of you have played an instrumental role in the success of my ATC presentation this semester, and I'm very blessed to have crossed paths with you during my graduate time here. So thank you very much. Also, thank you to my wife and my family for putting up with all my crazy ideas over the years. It's really been helpful for me going through this process. So I want to start my presentation off with my appearance on the Maury Povich show. And when it came time for the lie detector, he said, "You claim you are strictly digital media art." The lie detector determined that was a lie. And that's true. I am not 100% a digital media artist. I feel that I'm very multifaceted. So hopefully at the end of this presentation, that'll become a little bit more clear to you. Boo. So a lot of people ask me, what is digital media art? And I give them my explanation. It's usually followed up by, no, really, what the hell is digital media art? Why so much technology? Why is my culture so involved with it? And what is my obsession with the obsolete? And when I think about the answer to that question, I can't help but think about my grandfathers. My grandfathers are both decorated World War II veterans. They immigrated here from Mexico. And they really lived distinct lifestyles coming up when they moved here to California. My grandfather, Nicolas, he retired as an electrician, and he's the one that taught me the basics of electronics. He gave me my first soldering kit when I was 12, 13 years old, and really just developed my love for getting my hands into technology. My other grandfather, Tomas, he retired from off the field as a truck driver, but he was a builder. He could build anything. He had every tool in the book, and he taught me how to use every one of these tools. He just amassed this huge collection over the years. And it's because of him that I've developed this love for making and building with my hands and working with materials. And like I said, both of them really lived distinct lifestyles until I came into the picture. And it was at this point that my weekends became filled with materials, building science kits, new gizmos and gadgets that they had made and they were presenting to me. In case you can't tell, I'm the one with the glasses over on the right. And so they also gave me this beautiful gift of deconstruction. They would hand me an old VCR or an old flashlight and tell me, here you go, take it apart. But then they would also show me how to put it back together and why all these individual components, separate, would work together and form a whole. And that's what they would teach me when I was very young. So my childhood really consisted of this building with these toys, building these things, and really developing my understanding of materials. When I was 13 years old, my parents put me into this engineering program called MESA. It took place here at San Luis State, this very campus. And it stands for Mathematics, Engineering, Science Achievement. And what it was an academy of like-minded students. They would get together every Saturday, and we would, because we expressed interest in engineering, physics, arithmetic, and we'd go on field trips. They'd have speakers come in and talk to us about new and emerging technologies. But the reason I bring this up is because every year they would have this competition, and it was called MESA Day. And all the chapters from up and down California would get together, and we would compete against each other. And so we would compete in structure building, website building, coding, prototyping. But I was always drawn to the maker category, the engineering category. And so this one particular year, we were tasked with building a model-sized vehicle made out of recyclable materials that was going to get launched down a ramp, and we would get judged on distance and on design. And so what I brought to the table was a Sobe bottle, little wooden platform, 2 wooden wheels, a little bit of foil that had some flash to it, and this is what I brought. So when it came time for the competition, my car went a whole 3 feet, and it took a hard right off the track, and so that was really discouraging for me. And I lost to these guys from Fresno, and I remember specifically, they had a 2-liter soda bottle with some CDs for wheels. And that thing flew down that ramp, I'm telling you, went like 20 feet. And so I was pretty dismayed. So when it came time for the award ceremony, I didn't want to go. I figured I was going to lose. But what ended up happening is they ended up winning first place. And the reason why is because this team got disqualified because they put rocks in their vehicle. And as we all know, rocks are not recyclable, so they were disqualified and I won first place. And the reason I bring this up is because at the early stages of the formulation of my identity as an adolescent, this validated me as a creator. It validated me as a maker. It said, Ricardo, you can be successful in the ideas that you have, and you put them into action, you can be rewarded for them. And so I carried this spirit with me. Because I was really, kind of a nerd back when I was 13 years old. I was really into technology, into video games and Game Boys. But that maker sparked this curiosity, this flame in me that's carried until today. As I started to develop my Chicano identity, my BFA work, it really started to manifest itself in the three-dimensional work that I began to create. And so the Chicano identity developed into a very huge presence, which I carry with myself until this very moment. After my BFA career, I began to experiment with technology and these abstract forms, or these unorthodox forms rather, like the suitcase, and merging that with a speaker system, and then reincarnating that in a later version with a Bluetooth wireless speaker system housed in a Patron bottle. And so this is where I started to experiment with these forms and merge them and marry them with technology. I also carry this very heavy thread of customization. Being a Chicano artist and coming up in car culture and lowrider culture, there's this very heavy theme of customizing things to your own personality, to making things your own and expressing yourself through these items. And so I take these ready forms, like an old school pedal car, and add a greaser feel to it, an old radio flyer wagon, and adding a Raiders aesthetic to it. No, I'm not a Raiders fan, but this is for my friend who is. And so this is another thing that I begin to carry on throughout my work. I came across Namjoon Paik's work during my BFA career. And this piece really stood out to me because what he's doing here is he's taking you on a walk down memory lane. He's using these video clips, displaying them through these old television monitors that are framed within these neon frames of these individual states. And what he did is, this is just a reflection of him when he moved here. And all this represents basically his experience coming to the United States. And I did something very similar to this during my first graduate show here, Digging the Scene with the Gangster Link. What I ended up doing is I took old video clips from popular Chicano films from the early 90s, and I merged them together with old sound clips. Unfortunately, you can't hear the sound, which is kind of too bad, but with sounds from the 1940s. And so what I did is I animated them in the style of a retro slide projector, and I extracted these very specific video clips and turned them into these mini animated GIFs, which is a popular art form on the internet. And so these all basically reflect this Chicano identity that I house within myself. I really relate to these Pachuco lifestyles. And so this was housed within this 1940s. Housed within this 1940s slide projector. And I programmed a mini computer called a Raspberry Pi, which is able to output video. And so with this Raspberry Pi, I married it with a very small LCD screen and placed that in the exact same place as that original slide. And so with the original functioning of the slide projector, I was able to project this video, this live video feed out of this slide projector, which then projected those video clips that I had edited onto the screen. The projector also sits on these vintage fruit crates that I've collected from California, which is more of an homage to my grandfather who picked fruit in the orchards of Oxnard. And it's really just a throwback and almost like a digital altar to that type of lifestyle that is past. And the audio came out of this 1940s radio that I hacked to be able to play the audio. And so what I did is I created this intimate experience with Gallery 2 at the time that occupied this middle ground between the virtual reality of media and the Chicano experience beyond most of our reality. So this was my experience to you guys. My second show here was called Socket to the Circuit, Electrophonic Funk. And it was really an exploration on using old pieces of material that I would found object, and really affect the gallery setting. And so what I did here is I used these objects, these balloons as objects, as the main centerpiece of the gallery. I coupled them with these 1960s speakers, which were really popular because they produced this 360 degrees of sound, which is what they were popular for. and an old TV monitor that would display these music videos of funk. And so the funk would then interact with the technology that would activate these lights in the gallery setting. So here's a quick clip of that happening. So these are the lights interacting with sound. And then within the gallery, which leads me to my final project, my ATC project, the most ambitious project I've ever undertaken in my life. This was crazy. It's called Funked Up by Tijuana Rick, which really started as an idea and some sketches, which turned into many more sketches, which began to hone down the final form that I was using for the presentation, which is what you can see at the Theta Gallery right now. And what I did here is I made a very nostalgic experience, which is housed within an arcade cabinet. And interactivity is through these programmed Arduino and a Max interface, which is housed on a Mac Mini, which controls the interactivity of the user. So a user can go up to these buttons and control the experience, and it's variable between any person that goes up. The experience is different because no one will have the same order of how they hit these buttons. I'm essentially exploring themes of music, in this case funk, appropriation, and interactivity through my personal experience and related back to my relationship with this funk music. The music is provided by these custom 8-track tapes that I recorded onto specific genres of funk. There's 4 funk pieces of funk that you can choose from: modern funk, arcade funk, boogie funk, and sample funk. So you, as a user, can choose any one of these 8 tracks, insert it in here, and listen to this type of music. And you can interact with the mouth that's on the screen and do this digital form of beatboxing to the beat of the music. A little bit of a close-up shot. I also made these posters to go along with the piece itself. They're a supplement. They all tie in thematically with this nostalgic state that's made within this gallery. Sticking with 80s color palettes, 80s arcade posters, and they all relate thematically in a style that I wanted to reflect back onto the arcade cabinet. Here's a video of it working. And even the kids love it. Kids like to get funked up too. So my work explores areas of Americana often cast aside. I consider myself a hacker in the physical form and a lover of the obsolete and repurposed, which all coalesces into my identity as a Chicano new media artist, but I've come up with a new term of Chicano media artist. This is now the identity that I have taken on for myself. So where does that leave us? That leaves us, or you have been listening to me for 15 minutes, ATC DMA, which is now a nice theme that I'm going to carry on, which is all things Chicano through digital media art. And this is how I'm going to continue my work. I plan on teaching and continuing this new identity of a Chicano media artist, which is something that I love dearly. So thank you, and I will open up for questions.
So the first questions come from from the committee here. So Ricardo's committee, it's Craig Hobbs, James Morgan, and Shannon Wright. Okay.
So you didn't cite any artistic influences, and I'm just wondering if you could express a few of them. Any contemporary artists working that are a big influence on you?
Right, so Pike definitely was the precipice for everything. It started everything off for me.
Right.
There's also another artist from the UK named Haroon Mirza, who takes a lot of used sound systems from thrift stores, right? Which I do the same thing. I source a lot of my stuff from Craigslist. And what he does is he takes these analog systems and hacks the circuitry and couples them with this digital displays of LEDs or digital displays of light sources. And so the analog artifacts that he creates in those systems then interact with those light sources. And a lot of times they'll make these repetitive rhythms that go along with that. And so there's like this theme of music within his work too. So that definitely inspires me. And also Corey Archangel and his hacking of Super Mario Brothers. And so what he did is he took Super Mario Brothers, extracted all of the artwork out of the game, except for the clouds. And so the clouds would then go across the screen in a Mario Brothers fashion. And so that was almost like this hacking of a system that's already made to get his own concept in there. And so I definitely adhered to that as well, and inspired by him.
I have a follow-up. Okay. So the aesthetic of your work really harks back, but there's a whole other trend in Chicano work that harks forward to the future, like Nortec Collective or Murkoff. I'm wondering why you've chosen to sort of recycle the past as opposed to sort of create a futuristic, future funk post approach. And I think of Ruben Ortiz's work as a painter, sculptor, hybrid. I also think just in terms of persona, Guillermo Gomez Pino would be a good person to look at in terms of performance and identity. So those are my question and just some references.
So in regards to using these old technologies, this like obsolete technology, the stuff that I grew up around, it's part of my experience, and so I like to reactivate that. I like to bring that back, and it's almost as like serving as like a teaching tool also, right? A lot of people came into Funked Up and they didn't know what an 8-track was. We were like, how do you use this? And I was like, well, it's how people used to listen to music. And so like there's this reactivation of history that I'm also doing in my artwork, and putting that through the lens of my experience. And also making it relevant again by using this new technology. Like, so for that slide projector, I put a modern day computer in there and was basically reinvigorating this obsolete object that can now last for another 100 years because it has this computer in it, right? And so now it serves a new purpose. So I feel that this stuff is kind of merging the future and the past together, and I feel like I'm kind of the key master for that here. Does that answer your question?
It does.
Thanks.
Another question?
Okay, well, I'll
Shannon.
start. I tend to make comments more often than questions. Hopefully, it will turn into questions.
Okay.
First, I want to say that in all my years here, it's very rare that something that is an ambitious thing that needs to works exactly on time and works beautifully and is fully finished and functional for a thing like ATC. So I was super impressed, but I also liked how you integrated your graphic design career world into this project, posters and stuff like that. I'm still especially interested in this customization idea, and it comes through very strongly, but I think there's so many directions you can go with that, even kind of amping it up even further. And I liked what you showed us with the 40 slide projector. And it made me think of an artist who lives, I think, in Kansas City, named Randy Richier. And he makes he takes tin toys and remakes them into kind of irreverent, strange narratives. And I saw that powder-coated slide projector you had from the 40s and thought, wow, you could really get into some kind of metal work and getting things, you know, custom powder coated chrome and all that kind of thing. Which is probably something you've been doing things like that. But I mean, I guess I can see a lot more sculptural potential. And I love, I think you did a beautiful job on this thing. And even, although of course it's being true to arcade games, as someone who never really got into the arcade game world, I look at it and I think like cafeteria table, with that amazing fake wood formica and then the rubber edge to it. So you've just done a wonderful job on that.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
I'm rambling, I'll try and come up with a real question later.
Okay.
I'll let James pick up here.
Okay, anybody have a real question? Yeah, James,
So,
and then Isaac.
I think you built like the best arcade cabinet. I mean,
Oh, cool,
it's
thanks.
like, and this is, and I built 6. And so your craft is just over the top, and I love the integration of the nostalgic technology with contemporary technology. One of the things that I noticed when I actually stood in front of it was that it had this feeling of almost a musical instrument. I mean, like just sort of a weird kind of like DJ tool or something like that. And I think that was like sort of underscored by the opening that you had. Have you had a chance to have anybody who has like some serious musical chops come in and like really play something on you?
No, actually not. And I do plan on reaching out after you had mentioned that actually during the opening. And I think that's a really great idea, just to see, because a lot of these things that I make take on this, like a second identity after I make it, that I'm not even really cognizant of while I'm building the piece. And so when people point that out, it's almost like having a second set of eyes look over your artwork and say, hey, you could also do this with it. And I think that's really great. Experiment.
The reason that I ask is because it felt like the technical construction of it inside of it was pushing in that direction. But I don't think that I have enough skills to be able to really accurately test that.
Right.
And so I was interested.
Yeah, and I think that's something I'm definitely looking for.
My question is about funk, and I was thinking about what Craig was saying and how the relationship of funk maybe being ahead of its time, and if you could talk about religious importance of funk to your work and why you've used it twice.
Right.
But there's also in the Gangster Lean, which is reference to a song.
Yeah.
There's also that funk feel. So
Right.
that seems to also be a strain. Could you talk about funk?
Definitely. So, little background, all of my pieces, the title of my pieces, they come from funk lyrics. Digging the Scene from a Gangster Lean is like a soul funk song. Funked Up is a song by George Clinton. Electrophonic Funk is by this artist named Shock. And so, funk was ahead of its time, you're right. And you can see that being carried out through hip hop, pulls from all those samples. Hip hop today still throws back to funk. A lot of funk artists were using some of the first electronic instruments. The 808 machine was popularized by Sly and Family Stone. And so he took that instrument, he broke hundreds of them, I think he broke like 8 of them, while he was making his songs. And so these guys were pioneers in these instruments, and they're pioneers in music videos too. And so this theme of using funk as a precursor for interactivity and Funked Up, you can see that through that beatboxing now. Because beatboxing was the early stages of beat making for hip hop artists back in the 80s who couldn't afford a beat machine. You'd have someone there that would beatbox the rhythm for them, and those guys would then rap over them. So you can see that thread of the hip hop to the funk, right, which then has that very strong connection. So you're doing a digital form of early stages of hip hop, calling back to the forefathers of funk, mixed in the same environment, I guess, that I've created.
So it's a way of acting, like getting your funk on.
Yeah.
The interactive funk.
Yeah.
I have
Another question, yeah, Barry, and then Robin.
I have one other question. As an artist, how time consuming is it getting all these 8 tracks to work? I mean, I remember 8 tracks in my car as a teenager. It must take a lot of your time getting all this stuff to work. Fascinating.
I think my wife can attest to how much time I spent late nights trying to figure this out, but But one important thing of using this old technology is I'm having to relearn this technology. I never really worked with 8-tracks before until this project. And I fell in love with the form of the 8-track because it's really reminiscent of an old Nintendo cartridge. And so then that kind of bridges this generational gap. It brings those two together. And so learning, I ended up having to purchase an 8-track recorder, and I found unopened 8-track tapes on eBay that were unrecorded, untouched. So I got as many as I could of those and recorded onto those, and had to mess with levels and gain adjustments for the sound so that the sound could come out as good as it could on such an old technology. So it just takes a lot of research. This whole project took about 4 months to make, and it was just working on one piece, the technology piece of 8-tracks, and then working with Craig to help me on the video part, and learning how to program, and learning a lot of wood techniques to build the actual thing. So just a lot of research, almost half a year of work. Thank you.
Robin, go ahead.
I really enjoyed your installation. As a Chicano artist, where do you feel the placement of your actions and interventions might have the maximum impact? So, for instance, wish you were out there yesterday on the streets for the election. Maybe we would have had a different kind of result, right? And bringing back, I'm not suggesting that you're saying you're a revisionist, somebody looking back and reminding us of the history that has been forgotten, but there feels like there's an element of that in your philosophic approach. So I'm wondering if you could address that.
Right. I'm glad you brought that up because there's a lot of opportunity to go beyond what I'm doing with just this thematic representation of this music. And so my next project that I'm already thinking about is going to go into the political area. And so this technology that I'm using here can be repurposed, obviously, for multiple iterations and variability within representation of different themes. And so the next project I plan on working on has to do with immigration. And so I think that really speaks to what you're talking about, and just repurposing this technology for almost a greater good, more than just my personal experience, but then to speak to and represent people as a whole that are, in that case, struggling with issues of immigration. And so that's actually where I'm headed.
And Tessa, may I follow up with that just
Yeah.
briefly? And then how would we access it? Where would that piece be accessed? In other words, where would you do your thing?
Right,
Where
so
do you do what
it's
you
actually
do?
going to be mobile, so I can actually push it around. Well, I guess I'll tell you what it is. It's a, what I'm getting is, you know what a paleta card is, like Mexican immigrants usually
Sure.
push those around to sell popsicles. And so what I'm going to do with that is I'm working with someone who that I actually work with at City Hall, and they want to put these mini video clips of the immigrant experience in place of those stickers that you see on the sides.
Oh, nice.
And so, since that thing's going to be mobile, it can either be in a gallery displayed on its own, or I can walk around at rallies. I can walk around and take it anywhere really, because it has 3 wheels and I can push it around. It'll be self-powered with battery in there, and so definitely, getting into that public art realm also is definitely something that I'm curious about. I haven't really experimented with that yet, but that'll be the first step in that direction.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah.
One thing you might, direction you might be able to head with the video games is the variable outcomes of a gameplay. And here you have a more linear kind of trigger system, but it might be that you push a certain button, you get one outcome. Another button is going to end up with another outcome, or a sequence of buttons,
Right.
just to sort of build a decision matrix, which could happen to anyone immigrating. It could go one way for one person, or another way for another. The other thing is, I think it'd be really great to see Tijuana Rick come to fruition fully as a performance.
He was there last night.
Yeah, which could be a big part, yeah, for sure. And then the last question was, you dated your poster as 1985, which I don't identify necessarily as the funk era. I'm thinking late 70s, early 80s, maybe by 85, we're looking at new wave and punk rock. Do you see the funk era in your experience as happening in the mid-80s?
Well, I came across it I was born in '85, but when I came across it, I came into it later on. And so there are some artists, like Prince was really heavy in the '80s. His subgroup Maserati was pretty big, and they were like new wave / funk. And so, funk just never dies. It's just always there. But my
Well, there's
experience
an
with
age
it came on later on.
difference, too.
Definitely.
for us, I mean, just the idea that that culture regenerates itself and people identify with it as new,
Yes.
even though it has origin points.
Mhm.
I mean, this happens with many genres of music, but funk is interesting.
Yeah, that's thanks to my parents. They had all their vinyl records that I was digging through and got to listen to Grenadiers and all that. But definitely going on the variability of the experience of the cabinet, I think it'd be interesting to explore other cabinets of other genres of music, maybe. So maybe you got like a psychedelic cabinet that looks different and does a different thing, and maybe stick records in. I don't know, but it's definitely something that came across last night when I was talking to someone. I like the variability aspect.
Another question? Yeah, Dory, go ahead.
Nice
Thank-
presentation,
thank you.
thank you. I wanted to just sort of follow up on the idea of where it's going, because there's so many possibilities, it
Definitely.
seems, that your work could travel. And Craig had mentioned the sort of futurist tendency of a lot of contemporary art, so there's a big movement in Afrofuturism, and it plays off of similar themes that you're working with, which is how to rework the past in order to rethink the future. But I wanted to mention another artist who's interested in the evolution of music, which is Dave Muller, who's a California-based artist that has really looked into these transitions, like to disco, from disco to new wave, and looking at it as important cultural history. So I think that element of your work is really strong, and people are talking about that. And I was curious if you had any feelings about how that might play into your work, all this research you've done on music history.
I feel that I really like to bring it out in these obsolete objects. So like I want people to interact physically to activate the music, right? And so there's also going along with the history of the music, right? The way that it evolves. There's also this evolution of technology that almost goes hand in hand with the music that's happening at the time. And so in this case, the 8-track is kind of supports that. And so I definitely thinking about the evolution of music. I'm definitely would also be interested in the hardware that also evolved at the same time. So there's almost like this duality of this parallel evolution that's happening. It's pretty much explored also.
So as a follow-up, to keep the 8-track alive, is that a way of keeping that culture alive for
Definitely.
you? Is that how you're
Yeah,
thinking of it?
it brings up a history, and it's really interesting when people come in and they ask me, oh, what is this? And they say, oh, well, they had them in cars, and some people used to listen to music. You can't rewind it, and they break. It's not like an iPod that, you can just take to the store and fix. They're very delicate, but then they also are very beautiful at the same time.
Okay, we have another question? Yeah, Lordy, go ahead. And then Andrew.
There's something subversive about video games. You can easily put some sort of agenda. I'm thinking of something like Last Starfighter to reference the 80s, or something like Interscape. Do you think that there's a parallel agenda with using the video games as a old technology to gain interest, mainly because we're so far separated from it, as opposed to maybe a culture like Chicano, that we are like there's a portion of the population that is somewhat separate from it?
Right. I chose the form of the arcade cabinet because it's very friendly form. Everyone can really identify with it, or at least people within the Western culture are very recognizable to what that is. And it really leads itself to interactivity. I mean, arcades are inherently interactive. And so I guess if I had this agenda to incorporate or bring people in to interact with this piece, the interaction's already there. And so then the messaging then has to come out of the machine, which is either what I'm going to do or not. So in this case, this was more just basically an experience of myself, right? This is how I interacted with these pieces, and how I am expressing it is just through this arcade cabinet that anyone can interact with. But I think there is definitely, I like to educate people on this old stuff. I mean, I really like old things. I'm very nostalgic myself. I like antiques. So being able to sit there and just talk to people about what this is, kind of like reactivating that history that might be forgotten. These arcade places are fewer and fewer, where you can't really engage in these objects anymore unless you're going to like a bowling alley or something. but I feel that there is that underlying piece of reactivating history that I kind of feel responsible for talking about, especially since I'm using that form to present my artwork.
Okay, Andrew.
Yeah, so you actually partially answered the question that I was going to ask.
Okay, good.
But yeah, so first off, I guess it's nice to see your work, and thank you so much for presenting today.
Thank you.
Great. And it's great to get familiar with your work. So I guess my question is, you're dealing with a lot of this older technology, and you're dealing with a lot of these, maybe some older forms of interaction. And then specifically embedded in the work, you have this Chicano identity that you've sort of been working with and talking about. What do you want the audience to take away from these experiences, and why is that important?
Well, I definitely want them to leave wowed. That's pretty big. You know, seeing that this 1940 slide projector, they're putting their hand in front of me saying, like, where is this coming from? Is it coming from a projector hidden in the wall, or is it really built into this thing? So I want people to realize that this technology is super powerful. We can do so much with it, especially if we can seamlessly integrate it into these old forms. So definitely just being impressed is one. Especially as a digital media artist, I think it's really cool to showcase your potential. And secondly, you know, I want people to take away my experience, you know, seeing where I come from as an artist, and that I'm very into this music. I'm trying to express these experiences of reality that I've experienced and kind of give it to a broader group that might not necessarily experience that, and then be interested in learning more about it. And so I'm showing these things in a set-aside way to kind of make it a little bit more friendly, a little more engaging for people, not as threatening, especially maybe that first piece. You know, those movies had a heavy gang culture associated with them, but I kind of removed the gang aspect of it and made it into this really cinematic type of Chicano experience. And so then it kind of sparks their interest a little bit, and maybe they'll be more interested in either following up with me or just going on and learning about it.
Another question, Dory.
Hi, one more question. I'm interested in this parallel you're making between media and Chicano history, and I'm wondering if they intersect. Are there Chicano histories of media? For instance, people have done research into the telephone and found out really interesting stories about the history and how the personal history, in essence, of these media that have become abstract and anonymous. And I'm wondering, in your research, if you found any interesting histories, Chicano histories of the 8-track.
Not so much of the 8-track. Like I said, it was just more of my Chicano experience related to these pieces of technology. And so I'm more, I guess, an appropriator of this technology rather than, I didn't really come across too much research into the way that Chicanos have affected the technology per se. The one piece that actually is pretty important, I guess, in my case, is on the bottom of that arcade machine, there's these lights that activate to the sound, right? So depending on the 8-track you put, these lights will activate, and they're really reminiscent of a 70s organ light. I don't know if anyone remembers those, but they would pick up the sounds in the room, and then those lights would flash off and on. But in the 60s, I don't remember the guy's name, but there's this Chicano guy that made a very small, it was called a color bar. And so you would put that under your dashboard. It was really long, it would take up the whole dash, and it would connect to your radio. So when you would put in your 8-track or your cassette tape of oldies or funk, then that light bar would activate at the bottom of your feet, and so the whole car would be like a disco inside your car. And so that arcade is almost like a reincarnation of that in a larger sense. So that's probably one of the things I can think of offhand, but definitely something that I should look into.
That seems like an important one.
Yeah,
You just
it's something
mentioned,
that I really wanted to make big.
Yeah, it's sort of the tangle of the two.
Yeah.
Seems like it would add depth because you're starting off with both, but then to sort of show that there is a Chicano history to media would be really fascinating. Like the example you mentioned is fantastic.
Craig, you have a question?
I was just going to say that I do think that the contemporary trends in high-tech Chicano culture are still very pertinent, even if you're more retro,
Yes.
because those your contemporaries, those people who connect you with shows and work. And Fernando Corona Murkoff is from Tijuana, but I mean, this guy's famous all over Europe for his incredible sample-based glitch music, and he works with the most advanced visualizers out there. And interestingly, I saw him perform at the Next IM Festival at Yerba Buena Center a couple months ago, and I mean, it was like a mind blower for the audience. They had just seen Natalia Lafourcade, I guess is a famous pop musician. Very different kind of music with Murkoff, because it's much more like 70s techno,
Okay.
like Detroit techno, or more glitchy. And also the Nortec Collective. I just think
Yeah.
Tijuana is like this very central point in terms of Chicano high-tech culture, and just that blending. It's quite interesting. And
Yeah, it's
I know there's a lot of artists I don't even know about, but that you could probably dig up
Yeah.
and find, you know. So I'll send you those links.
Okay. Yeah, Tijuana's a really interesting place. Definitely an amalgamation of cultures coming together in a really unique way.
Okay, Naranja?
I just want to quickly bounce off what the previous question or comment, and thinking about the interface of your game, the video game, arcade game, which is beautifully constructed and sculptural. And I think about one of the things that you mentioned about having the console, sort of the console of the light up dashboard and stuff in your car, and the sound systems in
Mhm.
cars, and thinking about how you turned the arcade game into more like a DJ booth. It's like got a little less game element, a little
Right.
more musical.
Mhm.
Yet, now that you mentioned, I was confused at first, not confused, but a little bit, thinking about the direction that a gamer faces their game and plays with the game versus a DJ kind of faces away or towards the audience and sort of performs, and how that the user of your work is going to be interacting with the work, but not really with the party going on or whatever. But then thinking about the car interface and how we, sound systems in cars, and how we kind of have these little miniature DJ worlds going on in our cars, and how we can trick those out and customize, and kind of started fitting together for me a little bit, and made me want to, it made me curious about what could happen there, with like just the way that the people who interact are, which direction they're facing, something that kind of minute, but kind of changes the dynamic between users.
Yeah, so this is a very personalized experience. So when you're in that cabinet, you're almost have these blinders on the side, the way that it's built, because it kind of protrudes out. So you're in there almost alone. You can kind of squeeze two people in there. Just like in a car, you can get 2 people to 4 people in the car. But it's a very intimate experience when you're riding in that car or you're in this arcade cabinet, just experiencing whatever is going on. And then, so each experience then is personalized to the individual working on the machine. So the beat is always going to be different. Whatever type of music they pick is always going to be different between persons. So no experience is going to be the same. Whereas the very first piece I spoke about, the digging the scene with the gang swinging with the projector, that was more for a crowd, where people could sit on. I placed like milk crates for people to sit on, and then they would watch this video go back and forth. And so just kind of playing. I already done the interactive thing. My second piece was pretty interactive, where multiple people can see what's going on. But this one was way more intimate, I guess, more of an intimate expression of what I'm trying to portray.
I wonder if you could get a hold of one of those cars from, I don't even know if they exist anymore in the arcade, that bounce all over the place.
Yeah.
Trick it out with a wild sound system.
Yeah, but like visual hydraulics or something.
Yeah. Anyway, for next time.
That'll be the next one.
Okay, Lordy, this will be the last question.
Well, mine's a really quick question. It's almost multiple choice. So,
Oh, I like it.
it seems like you're using the Chicano point of view as a filter to look at these various, appropriate video games. So my question is, are you using the Chicano point of view from the 80s or something more contemporary as that filter for this movie. It's like,
Oh, for this particular installation? That's a good question. I would say it'd be both my experience now, learning these new technologies, right? So you have the, being powered by Mac Mini, and then yes, the culture from the 80s. And so it's like a throwback to that Chicano experience with this music specifically. But the interface itself is definitely contemporary, definitely, because we're generating an interactive experience with technology from 2014. So that interface and that connection between those buttons and that computer which activates that video is technology that just came out. And then Max, I'm not sure how long the Max program has been out. 80s? Oh. The whole thing is 80s, how about that? I'm a time traveler.
All right, I think we're gonna wrap it up right there.
Okay.
Thank you very much. And because we got a little bit of a late start, I think we're just gonna start right up here.